my project is Double Consciousness and the Racial Self, in Zikala Shah's American Indian Stories, John Okada's No No Boy, Jansi Senna's Caucasia, and Eric Liu's The Accidental Asian. And this is actually just a portion of my paper kind of summarizing what I've been doing, because it's going to be about 30 pages, so I don't want to read that out loud to you guys. Here we go. In 1903, the African-American intellectual and political figure W.E.B. Du Bois introduced the concept of double consciousness in the souls of Black folk. Du Bois defines double consciousness as the struggle African Americans face to remain true to Black culture while at the same time conforming to the dominant white society. Du Bois explains, quote, "It is a peculiar sensation, this double consciousness. One never feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro. Two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body, whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder." End quote. Over 100 years later, double consciousness is no longer limited to the lives of African Americans. Various ethnic Americans experience this split in consciousness while attempting to merge their specific cultural heritages with the values of dominant white society. By providing a representation of society through its characters and their interactions with the world around them, literature has been an important tool in the exploration of double consciousness. Zikala Shah's American Indian Stories, John Okada's No No Boy, Jansi Senna's Caucasia, Eric Liu's The Accidental Asian, all depict Americans of diverse ethnic backgrounds facing divided cultural identities. The initial goal of this project was to explore the role that double consciousness plays in shaping the racial identities of Native Americans, Japanese Americans, African Americans, and Chinese Americans. However, while conducting my research, I began to question the usefulness of the term double consciousness. In what follows, I will discuss the ways in which the previously mentioned texts display the shift in race thinking that has taken place over the past 100 years, while questioning the usefulness of the term double consciousness in 21st century America. In order to explore the presence of double consciousness in each of the novels, a clear understanding of the theory of double consciousness is necessary. Du Bois scholar Rutledge Dennis breaks double consciousness down into three main components. He first argues that the American world yields to Blacks no true self-consciousness. This holds America accountable for African Americans' clouded perceptions of themselves. The second component, Dennis argues, is, quote, that Blacks always see themselves through the eyes of others, end quote. African Americans are torn between the way they see themselves and the way they are seen by others. Their identities become fragmented as a result of this struggle. The third component is, according to Dennis, that, quote, there exists an eternal and unreconciled two-ness, two thoughts, two souls, two warring ideals within the collective Black population, end quote. By conforming to the expectations of whites, African Americans split themselves into two different selves. In this paper, I will apply this understanding of double consciousness not only to Jansi Senna's Caucasia, a novel about Black-white relations in Boston in 1970s, but also to Zikala Shah in American Indian Stories, Achiro, the protagonist in Okada's No No Boy, and Eric Liu in The Accidental Asian. Several scholars have used double consciousness as a model from which to build their own theories of racial identity. Paul Gilroy, the author of The Black Atlantic and Against Race, uses W.B. Du Bois's original proposition of double consciousness to examine racial identity, but finally urges individuals to abandon race thinking altogether. In Against Race, he explains, quote, the modern times that W.E.B. Du Bois once identified as the century of the color line have now passed, end quote. Gilroy reflects on the shift in race thinking that has occurred over time. Gilroy's Against Race, quote, considers patterns of conflict connected to the consolidation, increasing of strength, of cultural lines, rather than color lines, and is concerned in particular with the operations of power, which, thanks to ideas about race, have become entangled with those vain and mistaken attempts to delineate and subdivide humankind, end quote. Although I will not be arguing for the abandonment of race thinking altogether, I will be exploring the shift in race thinking that Gilroy proposes. Like Paul Gilroy, feminist scholar Linda Alcoff recognizes the changes in the color line and the obsolescence of thinking in terms of strictly black and white. Alcoff states, quote, If W.B. Du Bois were alive today, he would probably tell us that the problem of the 21st century will prove to be the lines between communities of color, or the questions of cross-ethnic relations. Coalitions across these communities are as critically important today as they are difficult to maintain, end quote. Alcock uses the belief that the formation of identity does not fit into the two separate categories that double consciousness proposes as a central focus of her examination in Visible Identities, Race, Gender, and the Self. She stresses the importance of understanding the ways in which the interpretation of race will differ across generations and political communities. In her discussion of the black and white binary, Alcock criticizes those who define race exclusively based on color, quote, as if color alone determines racial identity and is the sole object of racism, end quote. This leaves racial groups and ethnic groups unable to define their own identities, since identities are chosen for them by the dominant society. In American Indian Stories, published in 1921, Sakala Shah, a Sioux woman and an early Indian author, captures life as a Native American child who leaves her native life behind to pursue an education from missionaries in the East. She's torn between two cultural identities. She explains, quote, even nature seemed to have no place for me. I was neither a wee girl nor a tall one, neither a wild Indian nor a tame one, end quote. While both W.B. Du Bois and Sakala Shah experienced the ambiguity of racial identity during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Sakala Shah's American Indian Stories already began to challenge the binary notion of double consciousness. Her attempt to merge her double self into a better and truer self supports Du Bois's theory in many ways, but it also demonstrates the complexity of race and the difficulties of breaking it down into distinct categories, white and other. Sakala Shah's inability to allow the process of assimilation to erase her native self only strengthens the feelings of displacement that she feels. Rather than giving into society's ideal of possessing only one identity, white, she accepts her multiple selves and rejects its attempt to mold her into its own vision of civilization. She refuses to disappear into white society as assimilation demands of her. Instead, she uses her place between two cultures to challenge the boundaries of racial identities. In John Okada's No No Boy, Okada explores the Japanese-American experience with double consciousness. The novel was first published in 1957, but it did not receive attention until it was published again in 1976. The history of the novel's publication reflects the Japanese Americans' place in society. It wasn't until after the Civil Rights Movement that white America started considering other racial groups, challenging the black and white binary. When No No Boy's protagonist, Ichiro Yamada, is drafted into World War II, he refuses to fight against his parents' native country of Japan. Although Ichiro was born in America, his ethnic background creates conflicting ideals. The world around him will identify him as neither American nor Japanese. Ichiro explains to his mother, quote, I wish with all my heart that I were Japanese or that I were American. I am neither, end quote. Despite his American citizenship, he cannot escape his divided identity. Like Sakala Shah, Ichiro is displaced from both worlds, reflecting the complexity of multi-ethnic identity and the politics of race thinking in the United States. Danzy Senna's novel Caucasia presents double consciousness through its original targeted racial identity, African Americans. Published at the end of the 20th century, Caucasia illuminates the cultural hybridity that led to a shift in race thinking after the Civil Rights Movement. Senna's novel explores the life of Birdie Lee, the half-white, half-black young female protagonist. Birdie's identity crisis begins when her interracial family is torn apart. Society imposes a white identity upon Birdie because of her white appearance. Although she doesn't understand the complexity of her interracial roots, she notices the way people treat her. By molding herself into what her environment demands of her, Birdie loses sight of her true identity, which is the perfect blend of two rich cultures moving effortlessly between the two worlds. Birdie isn't able to melt into this mixture, however, since she's forced to choose one world over the other. By taking on black, white, and Jewish identities throughout the novel, Birdie Lee's representation of identity as a performance challenges the color line by showing its mutability. Her embodiment of these various ethnic identities display the complexity of, quote, the lines between communities of color, end quote, and cross-ethnic relations. Eric Liu, in his memoir, The Accidental Asian, is split between the American world he lives in and the Chinese world his parents have left behind. Liu refers to the tragedy of assimilation as, quote, the inevitable estrangement between the immigrant father who imagines himself in exile and the American son who strains to prove his belonging, end quote. Eric Liu uses his personal experience to test the color line. He highlights the imposing of identities upon selected racial groups. Quote, every identity is a social construction, a drawing of arbitrary lines. But are all identities equally arbitrary and equally necessary? It's worthwhile to compare a racial identity like Asian American with what might be said to exist within it, ethnicity, and around it, nation, end quote. His Chinese American experience parallels the Japanese American experience. Like a Chiro no-no boy, he is alienated from America due to his parents' original birthplace. Not even his American citizenship can cement his place in white America. His isolation for both worlds and his opposition to assimilation fragment his identity. Although Liu recognizes his fragmented identity, he does not let society stand in the way of his personal development. Quote, I define my identity then in the simplest way possible, according to those with whom I identify, and I identify with those who move me, end quote. While literary characters of various racial groups and ethnicities experience double consciousness and reflect the complexities of ethnic identities, I specifically chose Native Americans, Japanese Americans, African Americans, and Chinese Americans because of their representation of the problem of the color line. These four groups are explicitly struggling to prove their Americanness. Although Irish, Jewish, Italian, and Polish immigrants, for example, initially experienced alienation in the New World, they eventually gained acceptance into American society by becoming white. Whiteness itself, it is important to note, is socially constructed. As Linda Alcoff suggests, whiteness was constructed through, quote, strict border control, illusions of purity, and a binary opposition to non-whiteness, end quote. This construction suggests that the assignment of racial and ethnic identities is arbitrary. It is important to challenge the belief that white equals American as well. By exploring the struggles that these characters face despite their American birthright, readers are invited to take a deeper look at the arbitrary nature of identity and identity politics. Will African Americans always be born between two souls? How is it that Native Americans, who resided in this country long before white settlers, must prove their American identity? Why are Japanese Americans and Chinese Americans assigned ethnic identities that link them to countries they've never set foot in? By exploring these literary pieces of the 20th century, I attempt to show how race thinking has shifted up to the 21st century. 100 years after Du Bois introduced double consciousness, the concept is still very much alive, just in different ways. Ethnic groups still experience divided selves, but the fragmentation of ethnic identity is no longer limited to a binary way of thinking. The black and white binary has shifted, and although the problem of the color line has not entirely disappeared, the line has been blurred, since individuals are finally recognizing the social construction of race and identity. Although scholarship on race and diversity has always played an important role in society, the topic is gaining more acknowledgement throughout the world. Racism and discrimination still plague society. Recognizing the constructed nature of identity can denaturalize identity, making it increasingly difficult, if not impossible, to rely on old ways of thinking about race and ethnicity. This paper aims to contribute to the process of denaturalizing identity. Individuals must think beyond the socially constructed terms black and white by understanding the arbitrary nature of racial identification. Dr. Richard Wright and Dr. Laura McLendon, whoever she is, and Kathy at the OUR, and Dr. Torda for meeting with me before I even decided to do the grant, kind of walking into it, making me feel like it's more realistic. Liz Gomes for being my roommate at the library, and Shannon for helping me by going over all my work. And most of all, my mentor, Dr. Carson, just for giving me the opportunity and saying yes, and for de-stressing me. It's impossible to stress you out, which is great, so.